For 300 years, the Grand Council Chamber of the Stellar Alliance had witnessed history. Peace treaties signed between ancient enemies. New civilizations welcomed into the interstellar fold. Wars stopped before they could begin. It was a place of order, protocol, predictable ceremony. Nothing unexpected ever happened here. Until today. The massive alloy doors at the end of the chamber began to open with a deep mechanical hum. Every delegate turned. Humanity had been invited. That part was not surprising. They had finally reached the technological standards required for membership. Faster than most species expected. Faster than many were comfortable with. Some called it progress. Others called it dangerous. But no one objected officially. What no one expected was that the human ambassador would not arrive alone. Ambassador Lyra Thorne stepped through the doorway first. She moved with calm confidence. Not rushed. Not hesitant. Her dark, formal attire was elegant, but there was something sharp about it. Something deliberate. Her hair was styled in tight, intricate patterns that clearly carried cultural meaning. Her eyes scanned the chamber briefly, then settled forward. She looked like someone who understood exactly what room she had entered and exactly what effect she would have. Then the second figure stepped inside. The temperature in the chamber did not change, but the mood did. He was tall. Over 2 meters. Broad shoulders stretching the fabric of a black formal suit tailored for power, not decoration. His skin was pale beneath the chamber lights, marked with faint geometric scars that were clearly intentional. Not random, not accidental. His hair was cut short, military short, and his eyes forward-facing, focused, predator eyes. They moved slowly across the chamber, not with curiosity, but with assessment, measuring distances, evaluating exits, calculating. He did not speak, he did not smile, he simply observed, and that silence unsettled everyone more than any weapon could have. Several species reacted instinctively. The Cepharian delegate, whose people evolved as prey animals, shifted backward in his seat. That a cluster of methane-based representatives began swirling inside their containment suits, colors flickering. In agitation, even the battle-hardened Varkesh warriors exchanged glances. Impressed, concerned, the human ambassador reached the center platform. Her voice carried clearly without effort. Honored members of the Stellar Alliance. I am Ambassador Lyra Thorne of Earth. She gestured calmly toward the giant behind her. With me is Lieutenant Jackson Rivers, my security specialist. Security specialist. The phrase hung in the air like something fragile, because everyone in that chamber understood what he truly was. A soldier, and not just any soldier. A human soldier. The High Chancellor leaned forward from her elevated seat. Ambassador Thorne, she said carefully, this chamber is protected by the most advanced security systems in known space. An armed escort is unnecessary. The ambassador smiled. That it was polite, but it carried edge. With respect, Chancellor, Lieutenant Rivers is unarmed. You are welcome to scan him. That should have reassured them. It did not. Because every species in that chamber had heard the stories of Earth, the high-gravity world where survival was never guaranteed, the biosphere filled with predators, microorganisms capable of killing their hosts within days, weather systems that could destroy cities, a history written in conflict, collapse, rebuilding, and relentless persistence. Humans did not survive because they were peaceful. They survived because they adapted, and sometimes adaptation meant violence. Lieutenant Rivers remained silent, hands loosely clasped in front of him, posture relaxed, but coiled. Always coiled, ready. The council signaled them to their assigned seats, outer ring placement, appropriate for a probationary species. Ambassador Thorne moved gracefully toward her seat. Lieutenant Rivers followed, and that was when several delegates noticed something subtle and deeply unsettling. That he made no sound. That a being that size should have produced weight. Echo, pressure, but his steps were silent, controlled, balanced. Every movement efficient, and wasted energy, and hesitation. He positioned himself behind the ambassador's seat, standing, watching, waiting. The council session formally began, but something had shifted in the room. Humanity had not just arrived at IT, had entered the chamber with a reminder that we are not harmless, but we are controlled. And that difference mattered. The High Chancellor allowed the chamber to settle before speaking again. We gather today to consider Earth's request for full membership in the Stellar Alliance. Ambassador Thorn, you may address the Council. The human ambassador rose smoothly. Lieutenant Rivers did not move, but his eyes followed her every step. Measured, protective, professional. Ambassador Thorn stood at the center platform, alone under the chamber lights. Honored delegates, she began, voice steady but alive with controlled emotion, humanity stands before you aware of its reputation. A faint ripple moved through the chamber. Good. She was not pretending. You have heard stories about our wars, about our violence, about our dangerous homeworld. She paused deliberately. We do not deny them. That caught attention. Many species would have softened their image, rewritten history, offered comfort. She did not. Earth shaped us through hardship. Survival was never automatic. It had to be earned. Our history contains conflict, yes, but also contains cooperation, rebuilding, innovation, and growth. Her eyes swept the chamber. You see Lieutenant Rivers standing behind me. Many of you see a threat, a reminder of what humans are capable of. Every gaze turned toward the silent soldier. He did not react. I ask you to see something else, she continued. Not just capacity, but control. A subtle shift, fear reframed. Lieutenant Rivers represents discipline, training, choice. The transformation of raw strength into focused protection. That word landed clearly. Protection, not aggression. Delegate Keval of the Outer Reaches could not remain silent. This is intimidation, he said sharply. You bring a war-trained individual into a diplomatic chamber. That is a statement. Lieutenant Rivers' eyes locked onto the delegate. Angered, emotion. Just assessment. Ambassador Thorn smiled calmly. Delegate Keval, Alliance protocol allows each representative one assistant. Lieutenant Rivers fulfills that role. Aides carry data devices, Keval replied coldly. Not combat histories. For a brief moment, something unexpected happened. The ambassador laughed softly. Not mocking. Genuine. Delegate, would you trust a species that pretends to be harmless? That hides what it truly is? Silence. Humans are capable of violence. That is fact. But we are also capable of choosing when not to use it. She gestured gently toward Rivers. I brought him because I refuse to present a softened version of humanity. This is who we are. Strength and restraint. Another delegate spoke. Saren of the Tactical Assembly, known for practical thinking. Lieutenant Rivers, she said, what are your qualifications? For the first time, the human soldier spoke. His voice was calm. I hold advanced certifications in close quarters defense, threat analysis, emergency response, and diplomatic protection. 12 years of service in Earth's defense forces. Multiple high-risk deployments. No boasting, exaggeration. Just data. Saren tilted her head slightly. In your professional opinion, are there threats to the ambassador in this chamber? A dangerous question. The entire room stiffened. Lieutenant Rivers was silent for exactly 3 seconds. Then he answered. There are 67 species present. 52 possess the physical capability to harm a human directly. 23 could do so from their current positions. 8 have natural biological abilities classified as potentially lethal. Shock rippled outward like a wave, but he continued. Capability does not equal intent. Current threat assessment. Minimal. The chamber erupted, voices overlapping, accusations, outrage. He cataloged us like targets. Unacceptable behavior. Impressive analysis. How dare. The Chancellor activated the chamber harmonizer. A low pulse silenced the noise. Lieutenant, she said tightly. A more diplomatic phrasing would have been appropriate. I was asked a direct question, he replied calmly. I provided a direct answer. Incomplete data would have been dishonest. Technically correct, which somehow made it worse. Ambassador Thorn stepped forward again. What you just witnessed, she said clearly, is exactly my point. She let the tension hang. Yes, he assessed potential threats. That is his role. But notice what he did not do. She turned slightly toward Rivers. He did not recommend preemptive action. He did not escalate. He did not react emotionally. He evaluated and chose restraint. Her gaze returned to the council. That is humanity. We know our strength. We know our flaws. And we work every day to master both. Delegate Saren spoke again, more thoughtfully this time. So you argue that humans can be trusted precisely because you acknowledge your dangerous nature. Yes, Thorn replied immediately. A species that denies its capacity for harm is far more dangerous than one that understands and manages it. The chamber quieted. The mood shifted slightly. Not relaxed, but listening, Delegate Kevo leaned forward once more. Words are easy, Ambassador. How do we know humanity will choose peace when it matters? Before Thorn could answer, the chamber lights shifted. Our ED, an alarm tone echoed through every atmospheric band. The central display ignited. Unidentified vessels entering restricted orbit. Point 6 ships. Armed. Approaching fast. The Chancellor's voice tightened. Security breach. All delegates remain calm. Remain calm. The phrase felt almost ironic as the first impact struck the outer shield. The station trembled. Several delegates cried out. Containment fields flickered. Panic began rising like a storm. And in the center of it, Lieutenant Jackson Rivers moved. Not aggressively. Not dramatically. Efficiently. Point 3 steps placed him at the ambassador's side. Body angled between her and the main display. Point 1 hand touched her shoulder briefly. Ma'am, he said quietly. Recommend relocation to reinforced sector. His eyes were no longer scanning the chamber. They were locked onto the tactical display. Analyzing, calculating, adapting. The ambassador did not move immediately. Instead, she raised her voice over the chaos. Chancellor, Earth offers assistance. The room froze, because suddenly the question of trust was no longer theoretical. The second impact hit harder. The chamber floor vibrated beneath every seat. Overhead lights flickered. A few delegates lost atmospheric balance and had to activate emergency stabilizers. The central display zoomed in. Point 6 unidentified warships. Dark hulls. No Alliance signature. Weapons charging. The Chancellor's voice cut through the rising panic. Defense grid, status. A tactical officer responded, voice strained. Outer shield holding at 70%. Attack pattern is coordinated. They're targeting power relays. Not random. Planned. Ambassador Thorn did not raise her voice. She did not panic. Chancellor, she repeated calmly. Earth has tactical advisors on board our diplomatic vessel. With permission, we can integrate with your defense grid. Several delegates objected immediately. Absolutely not. You would gain access to our systems. This could be staged. Lieutenant Rivers spoke quietly, but the calm in his tone carried weight. If this were staged, he said, eyes still on the display, the attackers would not be targeting structural weaknesses first. They would be creating spectacle. That detail made several tactical delegates pause, that he continued. They are testing shield harmonics, looking for frequency instability. They've studied Alliance defenses before. The Chancellor narrowed her eyes. How do you know that? Rivers replied without hesitation. Because that is how we would do it. Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Honest. Another impact. Shield integrity dropped to 62%. That a section of the chamber wall cracked slightly before emergency field sealed it. Fear spread faster now. Species that had never experienced direct combat began showing visible distress. Atmospheric colors shifting. Bioluminescent patterns flashing erratically. Audible distress signals and frequencies humans could barely hear, but one figure remained perfectly still. Lieutenant Jackson Rivers, his breathing steady, heart rate unchanged. His mind had already shifted from diplomacy to defense. Not emotional, operational. The Chancellor made a decision. Ambassador Thorn. Limited integration. Your tactical advisors will receive external sensor data only. No internal access. Thorn nodded once. Accepted. She tapped her wrist device. Earth Vessel Horizon. This is Thorn. You're cleared for external tactical analysis. Feed solutions to my terminal. A calm human voice responded instantly. Copy that, Ambassador. Uploading predictive modeling now. Within seconds, the central display split. Alliance grid on one side. Human predictive overlay on the other. Color vectors began mapping enemy firing patterns. Projected shield stress points appeared. Future impact zones highlighted 3 seconds before they occurred. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Delegate Saren leaned forward. How are they calculating that in real time? Rivers answered. Earth has fought opponents with technological advantages before. We compensate with modeling and pattern disruption. Another impact struck exactly where the human overlay predicted. This time, the shield shifted frequency half a second earlier. The blast dispersed. Damage reduced by 40%. The chamber felt it. The difference, the attacking ships adjusted formation. Rivers' eyes narrowed slightly. They've noticed the adaptation. On screen, 2 enemy vessels broke formation, flanking wide. They'll attempt simultaneous cross-frequency strikes, he continued. Overload from opposite vectors. The Chancellor turned sharply toward him. Recommendation? His answer came instantly. Drop shield strength on Sector 12 by 15%. Make it appear unstable. Several delegates reacted in shock. Lower shields? That's insanity. Rivers did not look at them. Predators commit when they sense weakness. The word hung in the air. Predators. Was he speaking about the attackers or humanity? The Chancellor hesitated only a moment. Then execute. Sector 12 dimmed slightly. The enemy ships reacted exactly as predicted. They accelerated. Weapons charging brighter, committing to the breach. Now, Rivers said calmly. Alliance defense cannons, pre-aligned by human projections, fired in synchronized arcs. Not where the ships were. Where they would be. .2 hostile vessels were caught mid-charge. Direct hits. Explosions lit the screen. Debris scattered. The chamber fell silent. Then, a ripple of realization. The humans had not only predicted the attack, they had turned it. The remaining 4 ships retreated slightly, reorganizing. Shield integrity stabilized at 58%. For the first time since the attack began, the Alliance was not reacting to IT was anticipating. Delegate Keval, previously the loudest critic, stared at the tactical display. You planned for this scenario, he said quietly. Ambassador Thorne answered softly. No. We prepared for the possibility. There was a difference, that a profound one. Another coordinated strike came. This time, Alliance shields shifted before impact. Energy dispersed smoothly. Minimal damage. Human projections adjusted again. Patterns evolving. Learning. Adapting faster than the attackers. Lieutenant Rivers finally moved his gaze away from the display. He scanned the chamber briefly. Not as threats, but as assets, potential. We can end this, he said calmly. The Chancellor looked at him. How? Rivers' expression did not change. They rely on predictive targeting. We disrupt that. A small pause. Grant us control of one defense platform. The chamber stiffened again. This was the line. Trust or control. Ambassador Thorne did not pressure. She did not argue. She simply said, you asked how you would know humanity chooses peace when it matters. Another explosion flashed across the screen. Her voice remained steady. Trust is never proven in comfort, only in crisis. The Chancellor studied the display. .2 ships destroyed, shields stabilizing, human projections outperforming Alliance algorithms. Then she looked at the silent soldier, still controlled, still waiting, not demanding authority, requesting responsibility. After a long second, granted, she said, limited control. One platform. Lieutenant Rivers nodded once. Understood. And for the first time since entering the chamber, a faint shift appeared in his expression. Not excitement. Not aggression. Focus. Pure focus. The kind forged on a world where survival was never guaranteed. Outside the station, one Alliance defense platform rotated. Human targeting protocols uploaded. Enemy ships advanced again. Confident. Unaware that the balance had changed. Inside the chamber, every delegate watched, because now humanity was no longer being judged by words, but by action. Outside the station, the controlled defense platform powered up. Its energy core pulsed brighter than the others. Inside the chamber, Lieutenant Jackson Rivers stood motionless, but his mind was moving faster than anyone could see. Data streamed across Ambassador Thorne's wrist display. Vectors. Speed calculations. Shield rotations. Micro adjustments. Human targeting software did not aim at ships that IT study behavior. The 4 remaining hostile vessels tightened formation. They believed the Alliance had simply improved coordination. They did not yet understand. The pattern had shifted. Platform control confirmed, came the voice from the human vessel horizon. Rivers spoke without raising his tone. Delay firing sequence by 0.8 seconds after target lock. The Chancellor frowned slightly. That reduces hit probability. Yes, Rivers replied calmly. It increases psychological disruption. Several delegates exchanged confused looks. Psychological? These were warships, but humans had learned something long ago. Battle was never only physical. The enemy ships split again, attempting to confuse targeting systems. Rivers adjusted instantly. Do not track the lead vessel, he instructed. Track the second from the right. Why? Asked Saren. Because it's not leading, Rivers answered. It's directing. A subtle difference, but on the display, sensor readings confirmed it. The second vessel was transmitting microburst signals to the others. Command ship, hidden in plain sight. Lock confirmed, said the human operator. The platform fired. Not a wide blast. Not overwhelming force, that a precise, narrow energy strike that IT pierced the command vessel's primary engine ring. Not destroying it, disabling it. The ship lurched, formation breaking instantly. The remaining attackers hesitated. Just for a moment. That moment was enough. Alliance cannons, now fully synchronized with human projections, fired in coordinated waves. One hostile ship exploded. Another lost propulsion and drifted. The final vessel attempted retreat. That Rivers' voice remained steady. Do not pursue. The Chancellor turned sharply. We can eliminate them. Yes, he agreed. But if one escapes damaged, they carry uncertainty home. Silence. That he continued. Destroyed enemies create martyrs. Surviving enemies create caution. The logic was simple, cold, strategic, very human. The Chancellor made her choice. Cease pursuit. The final hostile ship fled at maximum acceleration. Within seconds, the battlefield was quiet. Debris floated where threat once stood. Shield integrity stabilized. Alarms faded. The chamber slowly returned to its natural light spectrum. But the atmosphere was no longer the same. Delegates who once looked at Lieutenant Rivers with suspicion now studied him differently. Not as a predator, not as a threat, but as something more complicated, controlled power. Ambassador Thorne stepped forward. No alliance. Systems were compromised, she said calmly. No unauthorized access was taken. The Chancellor nodded slowly. That is correct. Kevol, who had objected the loudest earlier, finally spoke. You could have taken control, he said quietly. Rivers answered before Thorne could. Yes. No denial and no excuse. Just truth. But we did not. The weight of that sentence settled deeply. Power is one thing. Restraint is another. Humanity had demonstrated both. Under pressure. Under fire. Without hesitation, Delegate Saren rose slightly from her seat. You disable the command ship instead of destroying it. Why? Rivers met her gaze. Because ending a fight is not the same as winning one. A simple answer, but layered. Ambassador Thorne added softly. Humanity learned through painful history that absolute destruction creates endless cycles. Strategic mercy creates space for stability. The chamber absorbed that. Some species had histories of endless retaliation, others of total annihilation. Few had learned balance. The High Chancellor stood. Her voice carried across every atmosphere present. Today, we witnessed more than tactical competence. We witnessed controlled strength, transparency, and cooperation under threat. She paused. When we questioned whether humanity would choose peace when it mattered, we received our answer. Her gaze moved from the ambassador to the silent soldier. Membership consideration will proceed immediately. A wave of quiet approval moved through the chamber. Not unanimous, but genuine. Lieutenant Rivers finally relaxed, just slightly. Not visibly to most, but enough. The crisis was over, for now. Ambassador Thorne allowed herself the smallest breath of relief. Humanity had not hidden what it was at IT, had not pretended to be harmless. IT had shown its edge. And then chosen control as delegates began emergency recovery procedures. Kevel looked once more at Rivers. You assessed 67 potential threats when you entered this chamber. Yes, Rivers replied. Kevel tilted his head. And now? Rivers scanned the room one final time. His answer came calmly. 0. The chamber, once filled with suspicion, now held something different. Respect. Careful. Earned. Real. Humanity had entered as a question mark that IT now stood as something else entirely. Not the most powerful species in the Alliance. Not the most advanced. But perhaps the most honest about what it was. And that honesty changed everything. Hours later, the emergency repairs were complete. The chamber lights glowed steady again, and alarms, and smoke, and shaking floor. But the silence now felt different. That IT was not feared, IT was reflection. The High Chancellor called the final session to order. Let the record show, she began, that during an external assault, the human delegation provided tactical assistance that prevented structural failure and minimized casualties. No dramatic tone, exaggeration. Just facts, but facts carried weight. Ambassador Lyra Thorne stood one last time. Members of the Alliance, she said gently, today was not how we intended to introduce ourselves. A faint ripple of restrained amusement moved through parts of the chamber. But perhaps it was the most honest way. She looked around slowly. You saw our strength. You saw our military thinking. You saw how quickly we assess risk. A small pause, but you also saw what matters more. Her hand rested lightly over her chest. Choice. Lieutenant Jackson Rivers remained behind her, silent, still, but no longer viewed as a shadow of danger. Now he was something else. Proof. Thorne continued. Humanity does not claim perfection. We have made mistakes. Severe ones. Our history is not clean. No denial. Hiding. But every conflict taught us something. Every collapse forced us to rebuild smarter. Every war showed us the cost of unchecked power. Her eyes lifted slightly toward the chamber ceiling. On Earth, survival required strength. But civilization required restraint. That line settled deeply across the room. Because many species understood strength, fewer mastered restraint. Delegate Saren spoke clearly. You could have used this crisis to demand leverage. Military access. Strategic agreements. Thor nodded. Yes. And you did not. Correct. Kevel leaned forward slowly. You allowed the final hostile vessel to escape. Yes. Why? This time, Thorne let Rivers answer. He stepped forward just enough to be clearly visible. His voice was calm, steady, human, because fear spreads faster than destruction. A slight pause. A damaged ship returning home with uncertainty will raise more questions than a destroyed one. The chamber absorbed that logic. He continued. Violence solves immediate threats, but perception shapes future ones. The Chancellor rose from her elevated seat. Humanity came before us today, carrying a reputation of danger. She looked directly at Rivers. You did not deny it. Then at Thorne. You did not disguise it. Her voice softened slightly. You demonstrated something far more valuable. She let the moment stretch. Control. A formal vote was initiated. Energy signatures pulsed across the chamber as each delegate cast their decision. Moments passed. Long ones. Finally, the central display illuminated. Majority approval. Earth granted provisional membership within the Stellar Alliance, and cheers, and celebration. Just a deep, collective understanding that something important had shifted. Ambassador Thorne inclined her head respectfully. Humanity accepts. Lieutenant Rivers gave a single, disciplined, and smile. But something in his posture had changed. Not tension. Not readiness. Pride. Quiet pride that as the session adjourned, delegates began to exit. Some paused briefly near the human pair. Not to challenge. Not to protest. But to observe more closely. Curiosity had replaced suspicion. Kevel stopped a short distance from Rivers. When you entered this chamber, he said carefully, you identified 67 possible threats. Yes, and now you say there are none. Rivers looked around once more. Delegates conversing peacefully, security systems stable, Alliance vessels repositioning defensively around the station. Then he answered, because trust, once proven, changes the equation. Kevol considered that. Then, for the first time, he extended a gesture of respect, a subtle one, but meaningful. Rivers returned it. Perfectly measured, as the humans prepare to leave, Saren spoke one final time. What is it, she asked thoughtfully, that humanity truly brings to the Alliance? Ambassador Thorne did not hesitate. We bring experience. She glanced briefly at Rivers. We know what it means to survive chaos, to rebuild after failure, to confront our own worst nature and still choose cooperation. A small pause. We bring the understanding that power without discipline destroys civilizations. Her eyes met the Chancellor's, and that discipline without strength invites it. Balanced, clear, human. The chamber doors opened once more. The same heavy mechanical hum as before. But this time, the mood was different. When humanity entered, it carried doubt. When it left, it carried recognition. Not because it proved it was harmless, but because it proved it was responsible. Outside the station, the human vessel Horizon powered its engines. Stars stretched across the viewport. Lieutenant Jackson Rivers finally allowed himself a slow breath. Mission complete, but something greater had begun. Humanity had stepped onto the galactic stage, not as a hidden force, but as exactly what it was: strong, imperfect, self-aware, and disciplined enough to choose peace, even when war would have been easier.